They called him a fool, marrying a stranger he met on the street in the dead of night. But when the truth about her identity surfaced, the whole town realized this wasn't just a marriage. It was the beginning of a story no one could have imagined. If you love stories of unexpected twists, second chances, and the kind of love that can change a life, make sure you subscribe and stay with us, because this one will take you all the way to the sunrise. Rain fell in angry sheets, drumming against the empty streets like a relentless war beat. In the dim light of a flickering street lamp, Travis Cole sprinted, his boots pounding against the slick asphalt. His breath came in sharp bursts, each exhale a cloud in the frigid night air. Up ahead, a black van fishtailed around a corner, its taillights glowing faintly through the mist. For the briefest second, Travis caught sight of a small figure being yanked inside, a flash of bright red. Harper's raincoat, his 9-year-old daughter. The sound of the sliding door slamming shut was a knife to his gut. He pushed harder, his legs burning, his heart pounding in his ears. In his left hand, he clutched a small, tarnished silver ring. The metal bit into his skin, almost as if reminding him why he could not, would not stop. That ring was the only piece left from that night, the night that had changed everything. The van roared toward the intersection. Then, out of the darkness, a figure stepped into its path. She wore a threadbare coat, soaked through, and a frayed scarf wrapped high over her face. Rainwater clung to her lashes, but her eyes, those eyes, were steady. The van's headlights caught her just as the driver swore and jerked the wheel. Tires screamed. The van swerved hard, barely missing her, before speeding away into the rain-blurred streets. Travis reached her just as she collapsed. Her body was cold and trembling against his, her breaths ragged. The scarf slipped loose, falling to the ground. It was her. Hannah. For a heartbeat, the storm around them seemed to vanish, replaced by the roaring silence of recognition. She looked up at him, lips trembling. "I know that ring," she whispered. Before he could speak, red and blue lights split the night. 2 police cruisers skidded to a stop, their sirens echoing against brick walls. Officers stepped out, hands hovering near their belts. "What's going on here?" one demanded, eyes darting between Travis, the woman in his arms, and the deserted street. Travis straightened, rain dripping from his hair. "A man grabbed my daughter, pulled her into a van. Where's the van now?" The taller officer cut in. "It took off before you got here. Travis nodded to Hannah, stepped into the road, made them swerve." The officer's jaw tightened. "And you expect us to believe a random van pulled up, took your kid, and then conveniently disappeared before we arrived?" Before Travis could answer, a voice from the sidewalk joined in, sharp, skeptical. A man stood under a store awning, live streaming on his phone. "This guy's been struggling to pay his daughter's hospital bills. Maybe this is a sympathy stunt. You know, go viral, rake in donations." The words burned. Travis took a step forward, fists tight, but Hannah's hand clamped around his wrist. "He's telling the truth," she said, her voice hoarse but unwavering. The officers exchanged a glance, neither convinced nor fully dismissive. One scribbled in a notepad. The other kept scanning the street, as if hoping the van would magically reappear. Meanwhile, the livestream's chat scrolled fast, half accusing Travis of lying, half calling him a hero. The noise was almost as loud as the rain. Finally, the officers stepped back. "We'll file a report. If you remember any more details, call us," the taller one said. Then they were gone, leaving the air colder than before. Travis turned to Hannah. "What do you know about this? And why would you step into the path of a moving van?" Her eyes flicked toward the alley where the van had vanished. "Because they'll come back. And when they do, you won't be ready unless I help you." He stared at her, rainwater streaming down his face. "Help me? I don't even know who you really are." Yes, you do. She glanced at the ring in his hand. And if you want to know the whole truth about that night, you need to trust me. Trust. The last time he had trusted someone, it had cost him more than he could bear. What do you want from me? He asked, his tone low. Her answer was as direct as it was insane. Marry me. Tonight. Travis blinked. You're out of your mind. It's the only way I can disappear, Hannah pressed. Legally. Safely. They can't touch me if I'm your wife, and in return, I help you get Harper back. He let out a bitter laugh. You think a piece of paper will stop whoever's after you? Her gaze didn't waver. No, but it will slow them down, long enough for me to fix what I started. The ring in his hand felt heavier. He glanced over his shoulder. Harper was standing under the awning of a closed cafe, clutching her backpack, shivering. Every muscle in his body was telling him to walk away. But his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through his darkest years, told him this was the only way forward. He looked back at Hannah. If you're lying to me, I'm not. Her voice carried a quiet resolve that felt almost unshakable. The rain fell harder, blurring the world around them. Somewhere deep in his chest, a decision clicked into place. All right, Travis said, the word tasting like a leap off a cliff. We do this. Tonight. In the heart of a storm, soaked to the bone, Travis Cole agreed to marry the mysterious woman who had just stepped into the path of a van, and into the center of the secrets he'd been chasing for years. The rain had not stopped, only softened into a cold mist that clung to skin and clothing like a stubborn memory. The small chapel sat at the edge of town, its stained glass windows glowing faintly in the dark, like a beacon for the desperate. Travis stood just outside the heavy oak doors, water dripping from his hair, his pulse still unsteady from the chase. Harper pressed close to his side, her small hand tucked into his. She looked up at him with wide, questioning eyes. Dad, are you sure? He hesitated. The word marriage felt absurd, reckless even. But then Harper's voice lowered into a whisper, almost as if she feared the night itself might hear. Dad, kindness takes courage too. Those words, simple but cutting, lodged themselves deep. Inside, the chapel smelled faintly of old wood, candle wax, and rain. Father Gabriel, a man with thinning hair and a patient demeanor, stood at the front, holding a worn Bible. His brow furrowed as Travis and Hannah approached. It's rather unusual to conduct a wedding at this hour, the priest said carefully, glancing between them. And under these circumstances. Travis met his gaze without flinching. We don't have time for usual. The priest studied them for another moment, then gave a slow nod. Very well. But marriage is sacred, meant to protect, not just to shield. The words hung in the air like incense. They took their places at the altar. The dim light made the polished wood of the piano in the corner gleam faintly. It was an old upright, one Travis had played in his youth during community events. Then, as if pulled by some invisible thread, Hannah's eyes drifted toward it. The lid was open, keys slightly yellowed with age, and without realizing, she began to hum. The melody was soft at first, almost swallowed by the sound of rain against the windows. But Travis froze. He knew that song. Cold Dawn, the very piece he had written years ago for the woman from that night. A piece he thought no one else had ever heard. His eyes locked on her. Where did you learn that? She blinked, as if startled by her own humming. I don't remember. It's just always been there. Father Gabriel began the ceremony, his voice echoing in the quiet space. The words washed over Travis, but his mind kept circling back to the haunting familiarity of that melody on Hannah's lips. They spoke their vows quickly, each syllable carrying the weight of survival rather than romance. When it came time to sign the marriage license, Travis's hand hesitated over the paper, The pen's tip had barely touched the page when the chapel doors swung open with a sharp creak. A tall man in a tailored coat stepped inside, his presence as cold as the wind that followed him. His hair was neatly combed, his smile a slash of amusement. "Congratulations," he drawled, his voice smooth as glass. "You've just married a billionaire heiress." The name came a beat later, like a door slamming in Travis's mind. Henry Blake. Hannah's face tightened, but she didn't look at Henry. Instead, she glanced at Travis, a silent warning in her eyes. "You have no idea what you've stepped into," Henry continued, his gaze sliding over Travis with thinly veiled contempt. "Or maybe you do. Single dad, struggling paycheck to paycheck, suddenly marries a girl who looks like she crawled out of a shelter. Quite the fairy tale, if you like your heroes opportunistic." From the back pews, a murmur rose. Members of the small congregation, drawn in by the lights and the late-night commotion, began whispering. "Did you hear? She's an heiress. He must be using her. Or maybe he saved her. Don't judge so quick." The split was immediate, the air heavy with judgment and defense. Travis straightened, his jaw set. "I didn't marry her for money." Henry's smirk widened. "Then what for?" Before Travis could answer, Hannah stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "None of this concerns you, Henry. Leave." But Henry didn't move. "You think a piece of paper will keep me from what's mine? She's coming back with me eventually." Travis's hand curled into a fist, but Hannah placed her palm lightly against his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Not here." Father Gabriel cleared his throat, clearly unsettled. "This is a house of God. Take your disputes elsewhere." Henry's eyes lingered on Hannah for one more long, invasive moment before he turned and left, the chapel door slamming behind him. The congregation's whispers swelled again, a mix of suspicion and sympathy. Travis could feel their stares like weight on his shoulders. As they prepared to leave, Hannah bent to pick up her small satchel from the pew. But as she did, something slid from the inside pocket and fell to the floor. A sleek black card. It wasn't an ordinary bank card. No name, no logo. Just a metallic sheen and a single embossed number. Travis picked it up, turning it in his fingers. "What's this?" Hannah's expression flickered, just for a moment, between fear and calculation. She took it back quickly, sliding it deep into her coat. "It's nothing." But Travis knew better. The weight of that card wasn't in its plastic. It was in the world it belonged to, a world she was running from. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm had only just begun. The city was quieter now, the storm having passed, leaving the streets slick and glistening under fractured pools of lamplight. Travis's truck rumbled into the modest brick building he and Harper called home. The heater hummed softly, warming the small cabin as Hannah sat in the back seat, her damp raincoat draped over her knees like a shield. When they reached the apartment, Travis led the way up 2 flights of stairs, Harper skipping ahead, still full of that unexplainable trust children reserve for certain strangers. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a living room barely big enough for the couch and an old upright piano. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Hannah stood awkwardly near the door, eyes scanning the shelves lined with Harper's drawings and school projects. "It's warm here," she said softly, as though the word warm didn't just mean temperature. "Make yourself at home," Travis replied, shrugging off his jacket. "I'll get Harper ready for bed." But Harper, already wrapped in her favorite blanket, tugged at Hannah's hand. "Will you tell me a story?" she asked, her voice sleepy but insistent. Travis opened his mouth to object. This was not the night for bedtime stories, but Harper's pleading eyes were hard to refuse. Hannah sat on the edge of Harper's bed, smoothing the blanket. Her voice was soft at first, almost tentative. Once, there was a mother who got lost far from home. She wandered through cities and forests, searching for her little girl. Every night, she'd look at the stars and hope one would guide her back. And the little girl, she never stopped believing her mother would find her. Harper's eyes fluttered as she whispered, "Did she?" Hannah's gaze lingered on the child, a shadow passing over her expression. One day, she will. When Harper's breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep, Travis lingered in the doorway, watching the unexpected gentleness in Hannah's face. It was the kind of moment that was hard to fake. The ring of a cell phone broke the stillness. Hannah startled, fishing an old, cracked phone from her coat pocket. The number flashing on the screen was labeled simply, Helen. She stepped into the kitchen to answer. "Helen!" A woman's voice came through, urgent and low. "Hannah, you have to listen to me. Henry's looking for you. He won't stop. Whatever you do, don't let him get close. And don't trust anyone he talks to." Hannah's knuckles whitened around the phone. "It's too late for that," she murmured, glancing toward the bedroom where Travis was tucking Harper in. The call ended abruptly, leaving only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the quiet tick of the wall clock. Before she could process Helen's warning, a knock came at the door. It was Mr. Keene, the building manager, a wiry man in his 60s, with sharp eyes and a permanent air of suspicion. "We've got a problem," Keene said without preamble, his gaze sliding toward Hannah. "Mrs. Patterson's bracelet, gold, family heirloom, went missing this afternoon. Someone saw you in the hallway near her door." Hannah stiffened. "I didn't," Keene cut her off. "We need to check your belongings." Travis stepped forward, his voice calm but edged. "You're accusing her without proof." "I'm protecting my tenants," Keene replied. "Proof comes from the security camera. We'll look." Hannah took a step back, her hand on the doorknob. "No, I'll just leave." Travis turned to her sharply. "Leaving makes it worse." She shook her head. "I can't get dragged into this, Travis. You don't understand." From the bedroom doorway, Harper's small voice interrupted. "If you run, they'll think you did it." The words cut through the room like glass. Harper's face was solemn, her gaze fixed on Hannah, as if trying to hold her in place. Something in Hannah's expression cracked. Not fear this time, but something heavier. Shame. Travis crossed his arms. "Let's look at the footage. Now." The three of them followed Keene down the narrow hall to the small office near the lobby. A monitor sat on the desk, its glow painting the room in cold blue light. Keene rewound the footage, the grainy black and white images flickering past, until Mrs. Patterson's apartment door came into view. There was Hannah, walking down the hall in her raincoat. She paused briefly to adjust the hood, then moved on. "Wait," Travis said. "Go back. Slow it down." Keene sighed, but complied. On the replay, the details sharpened. Just before Hannah passed the door, another figure appeared at the far end of the hall, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat. His face was obscured as he stepped close behind her. In a swift, almost imperceptible motion, he slipped something into the side pocket of her raincoat before continuing in the opposite direction. Travis leaned closer to the screen. The grainy light caught the man's profile just enough for recognition to hit like a fist. Henry Blake. The bracelet glinted briefly before disappearing into the pocket. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the monitor. Keene's expression shifted from suspicion to discomfort. "Well, I'll, clear this up with Mrs. Patterson." He left without meeting Hannah's eyes. Hannah stood frozen, one hand clutching the edge of the desk. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and raw. "He's not gonna stop, is he?" Travis looked at her, his jaw tight. Not unless we make him. Outside, the rain had started again. Soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the windows like an impatient hand. The rain lingered into the next day, a steady silver curtain outside Travis's apartment windows. The air inside was quiet but tense. Harper sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring in a worn sketchbook, while Travis fixed a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet. Hannah, standing in the corner near the upright piano, let her fingers drift along the keys, testing the sound, like someone reacquainting themselves with an old language. It wasn't much to look at. Scratches along the wood, a chipped corner on the lid. But the piano had a history. To Travis, it was more than furniture. It was the one thing he'd kept from the shelter 6 years ago, the place where music had once been his escape. Her fingertips pressed down, tentative at first, then with more certainty. A melody began to form, soft, aching, familiar. Travis's head turned before he realized why. He knew those notes. Cold Dawn, the song he had written in the sleepless hours of a winter night, after the fire alarms had jolted everyone in the shelter awake. A song he thought no one else had heard. You know that piece? His voice was careful, but his eyes searched hers for answers. Hannah froze mid-phrase, her hand hovering over the keys. I shouldn't have played it. Travis stepped closer, leaning against the piano. That's not an answer. Her gaze dropped to the worn ivory. I was there, that night, at the shelter. She swallowed, voice low and uneven. I heard you play it while everything outside was falling apart. Travis's brow furrowed. You were there. She nodded, but didn't look at him. I stayed in the women's wing. I knew your name, but I didn't speak to you. I couldn't. Why? Her lips trembled, the memory pulling her backward. Because there was a man outside that night. There was blood on his shirt. Henry was with him. The name hit him like a cold wind. Henry Blake. She flinched. Something happened. Someone died. I didn't see everything, but I knew enough to know I had to disappear. If I spoke to you, you might get pulled into it too. Travis stepped back, his jaw tightening. So you just vanish. And then, what? You show up years later pretending to be someone else. I wasn't pretending. Yes, you were, he snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. You've been vague about everything since the moment I met you. You let me take you in, let Harper trust you, but you can't even tell me the full truth. Her shoulders curled inward. I didn't want to bring danger to your door. Too late for that, he said bitterly. From the floor, Harper looked up, her crayons paused mid-color. Dad? Travis's anger dimmed, but the damage was done. Hannah stepped away from the piano, her raincoat hanging loosely from her shoulders like a retreating tide. By afternoon, the online storm had picked up again. A blog had posted the security footage from the building, framing it as mysterious woman, framed or caught. The comment section split into warring camps. Some defended Hannah after the proof of Henry's setup. Others accused Travis of staging the entire thing for sympathy and donations. Travis closed the laptop with a curse. This isn't going away. It never does, Hannah murmured from the couch. He looked at her, wanting to push for more answers, but the words stayed locked in his throat. That night, after Harper was in bed, a knock came at the door. Measured, deliberate. Travis opened it to find a tall man in an expensive overcoat, his silver hair perfectly in place despite the wind. His presence carried an unspoken authority, the kind that didn't require an introduction. Mr. Cole? The man asked. That's me. I'm Howard Reed. He extended a hand, but Travis didn't take it. Howard's eyes flicked around the small apartment before settling back on Travis. We should speak privately. Travis stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Howard's tone was calm, almost courteous. "I understand you've married my daughter." Travis's chest tightened. "If you're here to take her, you're wasting your time." Howard smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not here to take her. I'm here to make you an offer." He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and held it out. "A considerable sum, enough to take care of your daughter for years. All I ask is that you remove yourself from Hannah's life." Travis didn't touch the envelope. "You think I'd trade her for a check?" Howard's gaze sharpened. "I think you have responsibilities. And I think you know that staying with Hannah means inheriting her enemies. Henry isn't the only one." Travis's hand clenched at his side. "You know about Henry?" Howard's silence was answer enough. "I don't care about your money," Travis said finally, his voice low. "But if you know something about the danger she's in, you'd better start talking." Howard slipped the envelope back into his pocket. "The danger is exactly why you should walk away." He straightened his coat. "Think about your daughter, Mr. Cole. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave." With that, he turned and walked down the hall, his footsteps echoing until they were gone. Travis stood alone, the weight of the offer pressing against his ribs, knowing full well that refusing it meant stepping deeper into a storm he didn't yet understand. The next morning, the gray sky pressed low over the city, the kind of weather that seemed to hold its breath before a storm. Travis stood in the doorway of his apartment, Howard Reed's expensive cologne still lingering faintly in the air from the night before. "I'm not taking your money," Travis said, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the hallway's silence. "You can keep your envelope, Mr. Reed. What I want is for you to respect your daughter's right to live her life." Howard's expression didn't shift, but his eyes, cool, assessing, narrowed a fraction. "Freedom," he said slowly, "is never free. It always has a price, and someone always pays it. The question is, who will it be?" "I'll pay it," Travis replied without hesitation. Howard gave a faint, almost pitying smile. "You may find the cost higher than you imagine." Then he turned, his polished shoes clicking against the worn floor, and disappeared down the corridor. Meanwhile, across the city, Helen, bundled in a raincoat with her laptop slung over her shoulder, sat in a dim coffee shop corner, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. Lines of transactions filled her screen. She'd been tracing an anonymous bank account for days, chasing a whisper that Hannah's disappearance hadn't been about running from danger alone. Then she saw it. Transfers, small but consistent, funneled into a nonprofit for homeless veterans. The records went back years, each donation anonymous, but the source always the same account. Helen's pulse quickened. She's been helping them this whole time, and never told anyone. Her phone buzzed, a new message from an unlisted number. "Stop digging, Helen. This isn't your fight." Helen's jaw tightened. Whoever sent that message underestimated just how much she hated being told to back off. By midday, the whispers turned into a flood. News threads and social media posts spread like wildfire. Local maintenance worker involved in military tragedy? Attached was a grainy photo of Travis in uniform, younger, eyes sharper, jaw clenched. Henry Blake's name floated just below the surface of every rumor, though he never appeared in the articles. He didn't need to. His voice came through other people's posts, feeding the narrative that Travis Cole's decisions had led to the death of his own squad members. By the time Travis arrived at the building's management office, his supervisor was already waiting, arms crossed. "Travis, we have to suspend you while this is under review." "This is garbage and you know it," Travis shot back. "I know you," the supervisor said quietly, "but there's pressure from upstairs. Until it's cleared, I can't have you on site." That evening, the community center where Travis volunteered was a microcosm of the storm outside. old friends, fellow veterans, were split down the middle. "I was there," said one man, his voice thick with emotion. "Travis pulled 3 of us out under fire. He saved lives." Another shook his head. "The report says different, and that report was signed off years ago. Why would it lie?" "Because reports can be rewritten," the first man countered, glancing at Travis. Travis stayed quiet, though his stomach twisted. The truth was tangled somewhere between memory and politics, and until he could prove it, the stain wouldn't come out. Back at the apartment, Harper burst in from school, her small arms clutching a brown package. "Dad, someone left this at the front desk for you." There was no return address. The handwriting on the label was blocky, deliberate. Travis opened it slowly, half expecting another wave of trouble. Inside was a thick manila folder, the paper worn with age. He flipped it open and froze. It was the original incident report from that night overseas. The one before it had been corrected. And there, in bold at the bottom of the first page, was the signature of the officer in charge of the operation. H. Blake. Henry. The room seemed to tilt, the noise of the city outside fading into a low, pulsing hum. Whoever had sent this wasn't just trying to help. They were handing him the one thing that could blow Henry's lies apart. And Travis knew, without a doubt, that the cost Howard had warned him about was coming due. The late afternoon light slanted through the cafe's tall windows, catching motes of dust in the air. The place smelled faintly of roasted beans and cinnamon, its hum of quiet conversation masking the tension that coiled in Hannah's stomach. She sat in the corner booth, her back to the wall, a small digital recorder concealed beneath her scarf. Every tick of the clock above the counter seemed louder than it should. She didn't have to wait long. Henry Blake entered like he owned the place. Tailored navy suit, confident stride, the faintest smirk playing at his lips. He slid into the booth across from her without asking, his eyes scanning the room before settling on hers. "So," he drawled, "you finally called." Hannah kept her tone measured. "I thought we should clear the air." His brow lifted. "Clear the air? You disappeared for years. Now you're married to some maintenance man with a hero complex, and suddenly you want to talk?" "Travis isn't the reason I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm here because of that night." Henry's smirk faltered just slightly. "Careful, Hannah. The past has teeth." Hannah leaned forward, her fingers trembling under the table. "You told me once. If I stayed quiet, no one would ever know what you did." Henry chuckled, swirling the coffee he hadn't touched. "And that's still true. If you don't say anything, no one will ever know I ran from that scene. It's simple self-preservation." The words were out before he realized the weight of them. Hannah's heart thudded in her chest. She glanced down at her scarf, knowing the recorder was catching every syllable. By the time she left the cafe, her hands were cold despite the summer air. She found herself replaying his words in her head, the confession hitting her in waves. It was everything Travis needed. It was everything she needed to finally step out from under Henry's shadow. She went straight to her father's office. Howard Reed was standing at the window when she walked in, his posture rigid, his reflection unreadable. "I have proof," she said without preamble. Howard turned slowly. "Proof of what?" "Of Henry's guilt, of what happened that night. I recorded him. He admitted it himself." She pulled the recorder from her bag, placing it on his desk like a chess piece that could topple the entire board. Howard didn't touch it. Instead, he exhaled sharply. "Do you have any idea what happens if you release that? This isn't just about Henry. It will drag the Reed Corporation into the spotlight. The press won't care about nuance. They'll paint this family as a den of criminals." "I'm not protecting the corporation," Hannah said, her voice rising. "I'm protecting the truth." Howard's gaze hardened. "Sometimes the truth isn't worth the collateral damage." "And sometimes It's the only thing that is." They stood there, the air between them brittle as glass, each unwilling to yield. That evening, the argument still echoed in Hannah's head. She was pacing the apartment when the phone rang. It was Harper's school, asking if she'd made it home yet. Hannah frowned. "She should be home by now," Hannah said, already reaching for her coat. She stepped outside into the cooling dusk, scanning the street. That was when she saw it. A dark sedan creeping along the curb, matching Harper's pace half a block away. Harper, clutching her backpack, kept glancing over her shoulder. "Harper!" Hannah shouted, breaking into a run. The sedan's brake lights flared for a split second. Then it accelerated away, vanishing around the corner before Hannah could catch the plate. She reached Harper, wrapping her in a tight hug. "Are you okay?" Hannah asked, her voice low but urgent. Harper nodded, her eyes wide. "Someone's been following me since I left school." When they reached the apartment, Harper set her backpack on the kitchen table and pulled out a package. "This was in the mailbox," she said. "It doesn't have a name on it." Travis came in from the hallway, his gaze flicking from the package to Hannah's pale face. He opened it carefully. Inside was a familiar manila folder, another copy of the original military report. The same damning signature was there at the bottom. H. Blake. Hannah met his eyes. Now we have the truth in writing. And on tape. Travis didn't smile. He glanced at Harper, then back at the folder. Which means Henry's going to make his next move, and he's not going to play fair. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to hush the world outside. Travis sat at the small kitchen table, the folder with Henry's name still lying open beside him. Hannah was across from him, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped coffee mug, her eyes distant. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small velvet pouch, worn at the edges. "There's something I've been meaning to give you," he said quietly. Hannah looked up, puzzled, as he tipped the pouch into his palm. Out slid a simple silver band, scuffed, but still catching the light. "The night we met, the night everything changed," Travis murmured. "I kept this. I didn't know why at the time. Maybe I thought if I held on to it, I'd hold on to that moment too." Hannah's breath caught. She reached into her own bag, fingers trembling, and produced a delicate ring of the same make. "I kept mine too," she whispered. "All these years." He took both rings and slid them together. The designs aligned perfectly, as if no time, or pain, had ever come between them. The sight hit them both with the weight of everything unsaid. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, her voice breaking, "for not telling you sooner, for not trusting you with the truth about that night." Travis shook his head. "I'm sorry for not seeing past my own doubts. You've been carrying more than I realized." The air between them shifted. It wasn't the full mending of a wound, but it was the first, true stitch. A fragile reconnection, a shared resolve. The moment didn't last. Hannah's phone buzzed sharply on the table. She glanced at the screen. It was Helen. "You need to hear this," Helen's voice came through, urgent and clipped. "Henry's moving. He's rallying a group of hedge funds to short sell Reed Global into the ground. It's a coordinated hit, financial and reputational. If he pulls it off, your father's company will bleed billions, and the board will be forced to oust him. The scandal will make sure no one from your family recovers." Hannah's hand gripped the phone tighter. "When?" "Soon. He's pairing it with something else. I don't know what, but it's dirty. Be ready." She hung up, her expression hardening. "I can stop him. But I'll have to go public. Tell everyone who I am, why I've been hiding. It'll put me in the line of fire, but it could save the company." Travis's jaw clenched. "And what about Harper? You think Henry won't use her if he gets desperate?" "I can't just stand by while he destroys everything my family built," Hannah shot back. "And I can't risk losing Harper," Travis said, his voice low but unyielding. "Not again. I know what matters most to me, and it's not stock prices or headlines. It's her." The room filled with the tension of two truths colliding. Neither of them spoke for several beats, the sound of the rain filling the silence. Later that afternoon, Harper asked if she could go to the corner store for candy. Travis hesitated, but she flashed him that familiar, convincing smile. "I'll be quick, Dad. Promise." He watched from the window as she skipped down the street, the little handmade bracelet she'd been working on swinging from her wrist. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Travis's unease sharpened into dread. Hannah's phone rang. It was Mrs. Latham from the building across the street. "Travis, I think you need to come to the parking lot. Now." They ran down the stairs, heartbeats pounding. The parking lot was empty, except for a small splash of color on the wet asphalt. Travis bent down and picked it up. The braided bracelet, still damp from the rain. No Harper. No sign of where she'd gone. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God." Travis stared at the bracelet in his palm, the rain running cold down his face. "He's making his move," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "Henry's taken her." The late afternoon sky was bleeding into shades of burnt orange and steel gray as Travis stalked down the cracked pavement near the city's old bus terminal. The air was thick with exhaust, rust, and the scent of rain-soaked asphalt. Every muscle in his body was coiled, scanning the shadows, eyes searching for the faintest trace. He crouched beside a loading ramp, his fingers brushing over a faint smudge on the concrete, dark, greasy, and fresh. Engine oil. Beside it, the faint imprint of a glove, industrial, coarse. He inhaled slowly, letting his instincts catalog it. Henry's men had been here. "Travis," Hannah's voice was low but urgent, a mix of fear and resolve. "This place, I used to come here every week." "For what?" he asked without looking up. "To hand out soup and blankets," she replied. "The people here called me the Evening Angel." It was then they noticed a small group of homeless men and women huddled around a barrel fire. One of them, an older man with a scruffy beard and a faded army jacket, looked up and squinted. His eyes settled on Hannah, and his weathered face broke into a grin. "Angel?" he called. "It's been months." Hannah knelt in front of him, her tone soft but steady. "Have you seen a little girl? Brown hair, red jacket, maybe scared?" The man nodded slowly. "Couple hours ago. She was with a big guy, mean eyes, fancy coat. They went toward the industrial docks. He didn't look like he belonged here." Travis's jaw tightened. "Which way exactly?" The man pointed past the terminal toward a cluster of dark, skeletal warehouses. Helen's voice crackled through the earpiece Hannah wore. "Got something. One of my contacts at the city grid let me tap into the industrial park's cameras. No illegal hacks, just old friendships and a good cause." Travis and Hannah moved quickly, Hannah relaying directions from Helen. The warehouse district smelled of metal and sea salt, the wind rattling loose sheets of corrugated steel. "Camera 13, north end of the park," Helen guided. "There. I see her. Harper. She's inside warehouse number 12. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, relief and terror colliding. "Is she okay?" "She's sitting on a crate," Helen said. "Looks frightened, but unharmed. No one else in sight. Yet." Hannah turned to Travis. "We need to call the police, and my father. Henry's crossed a line and we can't do this alone." Travis shook his head, his voice calm but edged with steel. "If we go loud now, Henry will know we're onto him. He'll vanish with her before the first siren gets here. I can get in before he moves her." "That's reckless," Hannah shot back. "You don't know what's waiting inside." "I know exactly what's waiting inside," Travis replied, locking eyes with her. "And I'm not giving him the time to change the game." They stood there, dusk settling like a curtain between them, neither willing to back down. In the end, they went together. Travis moved with silent precision, Hannah close behind, her breathing controlled but quick. The warehouse loomed ahead, tall, windowless, a rusted door barely clinging to its hinges. Travis tested the handle. It turned with a groan. He pushed it open, light from the street spilling into the darkness. Empty. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and damp wood. Crates were scattered across the floor. A single folding chair sat in the middle of the space, vacant, and on top of it, a small, battered pager. Travis stepped forward, picking it up. As soon as his finger brushed the side, the device lit up. Numbers began to scroll across the tiny display, ending in a short, chilling message. "Want to see the girl?" A pause. Then, "Rooftop. Riverview Hotel." The final line blinked, almost tauntingly. 8:30, sharp. Travis's grip tightened until the plastic creaked. Hannah's eyes locked on his, wide with the weight of what this meant. They had less than an hour, and Henry was pulling them into his own chosen battleground. The night air was razor-sharp at that height, carrying the howl of the river wind between the glass towers. From the street below, the Riverview Hotel looked like a monument to luxury. From its rooftop, it felt like a stage, one where the wrong step meant death. Travis emerged from the stairwell, every sense screaming. Harper was there, small, trembling, her wrists bound, a strip of duct tape over her mouth. She was seated on the very lip of the rooftop wall, her legs dangling over 30 floors of empty air. The city lights shimmered far beneath her like cold stars. Henry Blake stood behind her, his tailored coat snapping in the wind, one hand gripping her shoulder. The other dangled a sleek folder, its embossed logo catching the rooftop lights. "You're late," Henry said, his tone smooth but laced with venom. "We both know how this ends. Sign these papers, renounce any claim on Hannah, and confess you were responsible for that incident in uniform. Do that, and your daughter walks away." Travis's voice was low, steady. "You're bluffing. You'd never let her go." Henry's eyes narrowed. "You're a man who gambles on hope. I'm a man who collects debts. Sign, and maybe I'll let her keep breathing." The wind tugged at Travis's shirt, at the frayed hem of his jacket. Slowly, deliberately, he shrugged it off, letting it drop to the ground. He raised his hands, palms open, fingers spread, showing surrender. Every movement was calculated to keep Henry's attention on him, not on the terrified little girl between them. "I'll sign," Travis said, "but she goes free first." Henry smirked. "No, you first. Always, you first." Behind them, from the shadowed corner of the rooftop, Hannah stepped forward, a small portable projector in her hands. Without a word, she aimed it at the side wall of the rooftop garden. A flicker, then the image appeared. Grainy footage, but the audio clear. Henry's own voice filled the air, drawn from the conversation at the cafe. "If you don't talk, no one will ever know I ran from the scene that night." Henry's grip on Harper tightened for just a moment, enough to make her whimper. Then he laughed, slow and cold. "Clever," he said, "but useless. An illegally obtained recording won't stand in court." Hannah's chin lifted. "Maybe not in court, but in the court of public opinion? Every phone in the city is streaming this right now." For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Henry's face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "You think I didn't plan for this?" His voice dropped to a snake's whisper. "Check the markets, right now." From her bag, Hannah's phone buzzed violently. She looked down, and her blood went cold. The live financial feed showed a brutal red cascade. Reed Global down 18%, 23%, 31%. Henry's eyes glittered. "While you were playing whistleblower, I pulled the real trigger. Your father's empire is bleeding out as we speak." The wail of sirens rose from below, growing louder. A door slammed open behind them. Uniformed officers poured onto the rooftop, guns drawn, shouting commands. Howard Reed stepped out after them, his face grim. His gaze flicked from Harper to Hannah to Travis. He had called them in, but the timing meant everything was about to detonate at once. Henry tightened his grip on Harper's shoulder. "One move, and she goes over. Let's see if anyone's still watching your hero story when the headlines read, 'Single Dad Loses Daughter on Rooftop.'" The wind roared between the high-rises. Hannah's heart pounded in her throat. Travis's muscles coiled. And the clock, invisible but deafening, ticked down to the next move that would decide everything. The rooftop erupted into chaos in the span of a single breath. Henry's smirk twisted into something feral as he shoved Harper forward, straight toward the edge. Her small body pitched into space, a blur of pale coat and wide, terrified eyes. "Harper!" Travis's roar tore through the wind. He lunged, every muscle firing on instinct. His arms wrapped around her midair, his momentum carrying them both into a brutal roll across the gravel. The edge of the rooftop scraped past his boot soles as they tumbled, and he curled his body around hers, shielding her from every impact until they came to a stop against a low planter. For one heart-stopping moment, all he could hear was the hammer of his own pulse. Then, "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling but alive. Relief flooded him so violently it was almost pain. Across the rooftop, Hannah's focus was a laser. Henry had his portable transmitter in hand, the device he'd used to coordinate the market assault. She didn't hesitate. Her heel slammed into the ground as she launched forward, snatching the device and whipping it across the rooftop in one clean motion. It arced over the edge, vanishing into the street far below with a faint, distant crash. "You—" Henry spun toward her, face blotched with fury. But the police were already closing in, their boots pounding against the concrete. Two officers slammed him to the ground, wrenching his arms behind him. Another pried the sleek smartphone from his coat pocket. The screen lit up with rows of encrypted transactions, each tagged with amounts that would make any jury's eyes widen. Payments to known intermediaries, shell accounts linked to the men who had snatched Harper. "Got it," an officer barked, holding the phone aloft. "This ties him to the kidnapping, wire fraud, and securities manipulation." Henry's laugh was low, mocking, even as his cheek pressed to the cold gravel. "Good luck selling that when your public thinks you staged the whole thing." His words weren't entirely empty. Down below, the city's digital veins were already pulsing with speculation. On streaming platforms and social feeds, shaky rooftop footage and half-heard shouts spread like wildfire. "The Reed staged a drama to pump stock prices," one commentator jeered. "Single Dad is a hero, saved his kid in front of cops and cameras," another countered. The war of perception raged in real time, every voice either sharpening or shattering the truth. Travis barely heard it. His focus was on Harper, his hands running over her arms and shoulders to be sure she was unhurt. Hannah crouched beside them, her breath ragged, her hair whipping into her face with every gust of wind. "You're okay," she whispered to Harper. "You're safe now." Then a sound cut through the rooftop din. Not the wind, not the sirens. It was a strangled gasp. Howard Reed stood a few feet away, eyes locked on the giant LED billboard across the street. The Bloomberg feed scrolled in glaring red. Reed Global down 42%, 47%, 53%. Lines of market analysts shouted predictions over the feed, all variations of the same grim truth. Reed Global was hemorrhaging value, its fate hanging by a thread. Howard's hands trembled as he clutched the railing, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "We're losing the company." His gaze was fixed, hollow, as though watching decades of work crumble in minutes. "They'll gut it. The layoffs will start tomorrow." Hannah turned sharply to Travis. In her eyes was no fear now, only urgency, sharp as glass. "If they take the company, it's not just him they destroy," she said, nodding toward her father. "It's thousands of people, families who depend on those paychecks." Travis met her gaze, still holding Harper close. The rooftop seemed to shrink around them. The cold wind, the fading wail of sirens, the weight of two impossible choices pressing in. "Cure him," Hannah said, her voice fierce. "Save my father. Save all of them." Somewhere deep inside, Travis knew this wasn't just about stock prices. It was about a lifeline for people he'd never met, people who'd never know the man who pulled them back from the edge. Just as Harper had been moments ago. The fight wasn't over. It had only shifted battlegrounds. The war had moved from rooftops and alleyways to screens and servers. For Travis, it was a battlefield he'd never trained for. Yet somehow, it felt familiar. The chaos of collapsing numbers mirrored the chaos of combat. Multiple threats, multiple fronts, and seconds to choose the right move. He sat at the worn kitchen table in his small apartment, Harper asleep in the next room, Hannah pacing near the window. The glow from his laptop lit the creases in his face, the quiet concentration that had once kept men alive in a desert night. On the screen, lines of code and traffic logs streamed by. Travis's fingers moved with surprising precision for a man whose usual tools were wrenches and socket sets. Years in the military had taught him how to map enemy movement. This time, it wasn't tanks or troops, but a network of bots hidden in plain sight, swarming the digital battlefield to manipulate headlines, flood forums, and tank stock prices. He traced IPs, logged timestamps, and plotted them across a digital map. Patterns emerged, clusters lighting up like enemy encampments. They didn't move randomly. They fired in coordinated bursts, every wave coinciding with a fabricated breaking news post about Reed Global's supposed collapse. "Helen," he said into the phone, "I've got the coordinates. Can you get your guys on the data capture?" Helen's voice was sharp, eager. "Already ahead of you. I've pulled in some of your old unit, ones you saved. They're more than happy to return the favor. We're scraping logs, tracing wallets, matching them to exchange times. It's going to be airtight." Hannah stopped pacing, watching him. She saw it now. The same relentless focus that had once kept him alive under fire, now turned towards saving her family's legacy. Over the next 48 hours, they built a case. Veterans from 3 states worked from home offices, public libraries, even truck stops, funneling packets of raw data to Helen. Every chart, every transaction, every suspicious wallet was cross-referenced. When they overlaid the timestamps with Henry's known market activity, the picture sharpened. This wasn't volatility. It was an orchestrated ambush. On the morning of the 3rd day, Travis pushed back from the table. "We're ready." That afternoon, Reed Global's official channel lit up with a notice. "Live address to the public, 6 p.m. The camera feed opened on a faceless friendly frame, hands, screens, and charts, but no close-ups. Helen's voice narrated, crisp and unflinching, as graphs unfolded. Bot networks firing in bursts, wallet IDs tied to shell corporations. The precise second each false news spike hit the market. "This," Helen said, "is not natural market movement. This is manipulation, designed, timed, and executed for maximum destruction." As the evidence streamed, a second window opened in the feed. Howard Reed stepped into view. Not the imperious mogul the world knew, but a father in a dark suit, his voice steady, yet edged with humility. "I owe my daughter an apology," he said. "I wanted to control her choices, believing I was protecting her. But in truth, she's protected me, protected all of us, from a truth I was too stubborn to face. Today, you're seeing that truth for yourself." In the boardroom watching the live feed, a few directors shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a silver-haired shareholder, with a reputation for ruthless calculus, stood and pointed toward Hannah. "You," he said coldly. "This chaos began the moment you brought your personal life into this company. We should be voting on your removal right now." Hannah met his gaze, her voice calm, deliberate. "If telling the truth costs me my position, so be it. I choose to stand with the truth. And if Reed Global falls, it will not be because we lacked courage. It will be because we lacked conscience." The room went silent. For the first time in days, the balance seemed to shift. By the time the live stream ended, the data had already hit financial regulators. At dawn the next morning, the ticker at the bottom of every news channel carried the same message. Court orders immediate suspension of short positions held by targeted hedge funds. Trading freeze enacted. Reed Global's stock stopped its free fall, but Travis knew they hadn't won. Not yet. The court freeze was temporary. The real war would be won only if they could bury Henry Blake entirely. And for that, they needed one thing no spreadsheet could provide: a witness. Someone who had been there that night, the night the military report named H. Blake as officer on duty. Someone alive, willing to step forward and tell the truth. Travis leaned against the apartment wall, phone in hand, staring at the contact Helen had just sent him. The name wasn't familiar. But if this man spoke up, the entire war, corporate, personal, and moral, might finally end. And if he stayed silent, the bots, the lies, and Henry's shadow would rise again. The first time Travis saw him, Hector was sitting on a bench under the rusted awning of the old bus depot, coat pulled tight against the November wind. His face was leathered from years of sleeping under open skies, his beard streaked with ash gray, but his eyes, sharp, steady, still carried the reflex of a soldier scanning for movement. "Hector?" Travis asked, his voice careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. The man looked up, his gaze narrowing, then easing. "Haven't heard that name in a long time. You're Callahan, aren't you?" Travis nodded. He didn't ask how Hector knew. Men who had shared a battlefield never forgot the weight of each other's presence. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of a distant streetlight. Then Hector sighed, rubbing his hands together as if to conjure heat from the cold air. "That night," Hector began, "you stayed behind when the roof collapsed, dragged Corporal Jensen out with a shoulder that was already busted. I saw Henry, H. Blake, look right at you, then take off running. Didn't even radio in, just vanished." The words hit Travis like a sandbag, not because they were new. He had known the truth in his bones for years, but because finally, someone else had seen it too. Hannah stepped forward, the wind catching strands of her hair. "Would you be willing to tell this on record? People need to hear it from someone who was there." Hector's eyes flicked to hers, then back to Travis. "I've been silent a long time. Thought no one cared about a homeless vet's word. But if it clears your name and gets that coward where he belongs, yeah, I'll speak." By late afternoon, Helen had transformed her apartment into an impromptu studio. The microphone was patched directly into a secure live stream, with a soft, constant hum in the background to keep Hector at ease. The broadcast began without fanfare, just Hector's voice, graveled yet clear, recounting the night as if it had happened yesterday. The details were unflinching, the crack of gunfire echoing in the dark, the choking dust, the heat from the flames, the split-second decision to drag a man toward safety rather than retreat. When he reached the part about Henry's eyes meeting his and the sudden turn, the retreat into darkness, the chat feed lit up. Helen cut to the next segment. Scanned documents, the original incident log with H. Blake signed as officer on duty, timestamps matching Hector's account down to the minute. Then she opened the hotline. Within an hour, it was jammed. Veterans from across the country called in. Men and women who'd served with Travis, who'd heard whispers about that night, but never had proof. Their messages poured in. I was there in the aftermath. Callahan's no coward. We all knew Blake pulled something shady. The weight of collective memory began to shift. The counterattack came just as swiftly. By morning, Henry's legal team had secured a prime-time slot on a major network. His attorney, a slick man in a silk tie, sat in a gleaming studio and smiled with professional pity. "While we honor all veterans," he said smoothly, "it's important to remember that post-traumatic stress disorder can deeply distort memory. Mr. Hector's account, though heartfelt, cannot be relied upon as factual evidence after so many years." The implication hung in the air like a poisoned fog. Hector wasn't lying. He was broken. It might have worked. Except Harper was watching the segment from the couch, her knees tucked under her chin. She turned to the nearby camera crew filming updates for the Veterans Channel, her voice small but steady. "I don't need the best dad in the world," she said. "I just need the bravest one." The words slipped past any legal shield. They landed in living rooms, in newsrooms, in the hearts of strangers scrolling through their phones. Comments flooded in, strangers typing through tears. That little girl just said what we all feel. Bravery isn't about medals. It's about who stays when it's hardest to stay. The tide turned. That afternoon, the courthouse clerk confirmed what everyone had been waiting for. The grand jury had approved an indictment. Henry Blake would face charges: dereliction of duty, obstruction, and conspiracy. And as if the universe had chosen the moment for maximum weight, another announcement hit the wire. The Securities and Exchange Commission had opened a full-scale investigation into the hedge funds Henry had conspired with. Trading records, seized emails, financial trails, they would all be combed for the same kind of truth Hector had carried for years. That night, Travis walked Hector to the shelter. The air smelled of rain, streetlights casting long shadows on the wet pavement. "You didn't have to do this," Travis said quietly. "Yes, I did." Hector's voice was rough, but there was no hesitation. "We all have our long nights, Callahan. Yours isn't over yet. But at least now, you've got someone else keeping watch." Travis gripped his hand, not the quick clasp of acquaintances, but the firm, grounding hold of brothers in arms. As he turned back toward Hannah and Harper waiting by the car, Travis realized the truth wasn't just about clearing his name or bringing Henry down. It was about restoring the kind of trust that made men stand by each other in the first place. And tonight, under the weight of street lamp shadows and the faint sound of rain, that trust had begun to return. It was late, the courthouse steps emptying under the dim wash of street lamps. The city air carried the smell of rain and exhaust, the kind of night that presses memories to the surface, whether you invite them or not. Hannah stood beside Travis on the marble landing, her hands folded tight in front of her. For days, she had carried the truth in her chest like a sealed letter. Tonight, with Henry in custody and the trial looming, she knew it was time to open it. That night, 6 years ago, she began, her voice trembling not from fear, but from the weight of return. I was there, not as who I am now, just a volunteer at the shelter. We'd had an overflow. Too many people, not enough heat. The air was sharp, everyone restless. And then, she paused, glancing up at him, eyes glassed with memory. "You sat at that battered upright piano in the corner and played." Travis blinked. The pieces began to move in his mind, slow and inexorable. "You didn't just play anything," she said. "It was cold dawn. You kept your eyes low, but every note. It anchored us. Even the children stopped crying. I was ladling soup, watching you, thinking, who is this man holding the night together with his hands?" Travis swallowed. The memory was fogged with chaos, the smell of gasoline, the sudden alarms, the gunshots outside. But the sound of her voice seemed to sharpen the edges. When the shouting started, people panicked. You kept playing, just long enough for me to help the elderly out the back. We didn't speak until later, in the hallway, before they pulled us apart. Hannah's lips curved in a wistful, almost broken smile. We had a few hours that belonged only to us, and then the world blew apart. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thin, folded sheet, creased and yellowed from years of handling. I kept this, half of the sheet music you left on the stand. Travis stared at it. Without a word, he reached into his own wallet, drawing out a matching scrap, edges torn in the same jagged arc. He had carried it through deployments, through job shifts, through nights when even Harper's laughter couldn't quiet the noise in his head. They fit the two halves together. The title, Cold Dawn, shone complete for the first time in 6 years. No words passed between them. The joining itself was enough, a silent covenant stitched in ink and paper, a bridge from who they were to who they had become. Howard Reed had been waiting at the bottom of the steps. The man who had once met Travis with suspicion now looked as if he'd aged a decade in the past week. "I owe you both more than I can ever repay," he said quietly. To his daughter, "And to you, Hannah, I owe an apology for trying to make your life mine." His voice cracked. "You didn't leave because you were reckless. You left because I didn't trust you to be who you are." He opened the leather folder in his hand. "The Reed Foundation needs someone with your courage and your stubborn heart. Take the chair. Run it your way." Hannah's breath caught, but before she could respond, Howard turned to Travis. "And we need someone to rebuild our veteran outreach. No boardroom talk, no PR gloss. Just someone who knows what it means to stand by your own when it's hardest. I want you as director of our veteran programs." For the first time in years, Travis felt the door open not just to work, but to purpose. The news of their appointment spread quickly, but so did the chatter. On a financial podcast, a commentator with a gleaming smile leaned toward the camera. "A heartwarming story, sure," he said with a theatrical shrug. "But let's be honest, our single dad just happened to stumble into the right company, the right heiress, and the right headline. Luck more than merit. He might as well have lit a match in a field of dry grass." Within hours, the comment sections of community pages and veteran networks swelled with outrage. Seniors posted stories of meals delivered by Hannah's team. Veterans uploaded grainy photos of Travis helping at disaster sites long before the cameras came. "Luck didn't get him here," one post read. "Work did. Service did. Integrity did." The wave built, not as a roar of celebrity defense, but as a quiet, persistent chorus. Neighbors, former strangers, people who believed good work was worth standing up for. 3 days later, Henry Blake was led from the courthouse in cuffs. The evening light slanted low across the plaza, gilding the scene in deceptive calm. Reporters pressed forward, but Henry ignored them, eyes locked on Travis and Hannah across the steps. As the car door opened, he leaned just enough for his words to carry. "I haven't lost," he murmured. "Not yet." The door slammed. The vehicle pulled away, and the sound of the city swallowed the moment. But his voice lingered like the last echo of a storm, promising that while one chapter had closed, another was already stirring beyond the horizon. Travis slipped his hand into Hannah's as they turned toward home. Above them, the sky was deepening to twilight, the first stars pricking through. Somewhere out there, the fight wasn't over. But tonight, the half-melody they had carried for years was whole again. And for the first time since that night, they were too. The community center did not look like much from the outside. A brick box set back from the road, a hand-painted sign above double doors, a thin curl of steam escaping an exhaust vent where volunteers cooked the evening's soup. But inside, the place held a quiet gravity. It was where strangers had once come to survive the night. It was where two lives had intersected, Before either of them realized what that would mean, rows of folding chairs formed a half-moon facing a scuffed, upright piano. Paper lanterns cast a warm tint over the room, the kind of light that softened every hard edge. On one side, a long table stretched wall to wall, lined with bowls, rolls, and thermoses that breathed out rosemary and garlic. Veterans in worn jackets and women with bundled coats moved slowly down the line as volunteers ladled soup. A handheld camera tracked the motion without faces, hands passing bread, a sleeve brushing a shoulder, a napkin offered and taken. The room hummed with the steady murmur of gratitude. Travis stood near the piano, sleeves rolled, tie loose, the old silver ring glinting at his finger. Hannah stood beside him in a simple dress the color of morning fog, her hair pulled back, her posture both expectant and at ease. Harper adjusted a small stack of sheet music on the music stand, swinging her feet as she perched on the bench. The title at the top of the page, Cold Dawn, had been rewritten in a child's round hand, with little stars sketched in the corners. Howard arrived without an entourage, his suit a little rumpled, his expression spare. He paused at the doorway as the camera drifted past the kitchen, where a young man refilled stock pots, past the bulletin board where notices dangled on pushpins. Rent assistance, counseling hours, a flyer for a woodworking class. People nodded to him, with the kind of recognition reserved for someone who once lived on the other side of the glass, a man who had learned what it meant to be needed rather than admired. At a cue from Hannah, the small crowd settled. A volunteer dimmed the lanterns by a notch, not darkness, just a softer warmth. Harper placed both hands on the keys, inhaled like a swimmer at the edge of the pool, and began. The children's version of Cold Dawn was simpler, fewer flourishes, a melody pulled into a clean line that any ear could follow. Yet something in it carried the original ache. The notes rose and fell like a chest drawing breath after a cold night, and the room's heartbeat began to slow to the pace of the song. A man near the back closed his eyes. A woman pressed a palm to her throat. The camera drifted from the piano to the serving line. Ladles paused mid-air. Lips moved to follow a melody they had never learned, but somehow recognized. Halfway through, Harper glanced toward Travis, and he nodded. Her fingers found a new phrase, a bridge he had written only last week so that she could carry the melody on her own. It landed with the tender confidence of a small hand, taking a larger one and saying, "We can cross here." When the last note thinned into silence, there was no burst of applause, only a deep, collective exhale, the audible relief of a room that had remembered something worth remembering. Harper stood, gave a small bow, and slipped from the bench to tuck herself under Travis's arm. Hannah kissed the top of her head and looked to Travis with an expression that said more than pride. It said, "We are all still here." Travis turned to the small podium. He unfolded a single page, not to read, but to steady his hands. His voice was low and even, carrying without force. "People ask why we come back to places like this," he said. "Why we serve soup when the world is screaming for other kinds of victories. I don't have a complicated answer. Kindness won't make you rich overnight. It won't fix every system or silence every storm. But it will carry someone through a long night. It will lift one person over 1 hour they didn't think they could survive. And sometimes, that is how a life turns." He paused. The room held still. "I used to think sunrise was just what the clock delivered. Now I know it's what people deliver to one another, one gesture at a time. Thank you for showing me that. Thank you for letting my family learn it here." Howard stepped forward when Travis finished, the moment unannounced and somehow perfect. He did not extend a hand for show. He simply pulled Travis into a firm, lingering embrace, the kind reserved for men who have finally learned to say what they once tried to purchase or postpone. The room shifted, shoulders softened. Someone at the back wiped a sleeve across his eyes. Hannah reached for Travis's hand. She pressed her palm to his and spoke without a microphone, but the words found every corner of the room. "I'm not running anymore." It sounded like a vow and a homecoming, like the end of a chase and the beginning of a life. Harper squeezed both their hands and leaned into them. The three of them joined in a triangle that felt, finally, like rest. A volunteer drew the curtains an inch, and early light crept across the piano lid. On the wood, their two rings lay side by side, the halves that had found each other and locked without force. The sunlight caught their edges and threw a narrow ribbon of gold across the sheet music, landing on the title, Cold Dawn, so that the word dawn glowed a little brighter than the rest. From the kitchen, the bell clanged once. Second helpings. The camera moved along the line again. A bowl refilled, a napkin offered, a hand on a shoulder, a pair of boots scuffed by years and still steady. A white-haired woman tucked a roll into her pocket, for later, and smiled at no one in particular. A veteran laughed quietly at something only he heard. In the corner, Harper began to pick out the melody again, softer this time, like a reminder rather than a performance. Travis replaced the page in his pocket. He looked at Hannah. She nodded toward the door, a small invitation to walk the perimeter and thank each person in the room. They moved together, pausing to speak without hurry. Faces were not the point. Gestures were. A ladle, a bowl, a folded blanket, a careful word. At the exit, a corkboard, weighted with a fresh card pinned at eye level. The edges were neatly cut, the font plain. The camera held steady while the letters filled the frame. Call an old friend tonight. Sometimes, a miracle begins with a kind phone call. The lanterns brightened by a notch, as if the room had taken the advice already. The door swung open. A hush of morning air slipped in. Somewhere beyond the brick walls, buses coughed awake. A bakery dumped warm bread into bins. A street sweeper drew a clean stripe down the curb. The city was doing what cities do, forgetting and remembering in the same hour. Inside, the family of three stood beside the piano, rings catching the light, melody joining its two halves. The camera pulled back until the room became a small warmth in a larger map, a lantern in a city that would need more than one. But for now, this was enough. Soup served hot, a child's song carrying farther than anyone expected, a vow spoken plainly, the first good light of the day sliding across a pair of rings that had finally found their way home. Outside, the sunrise took the horizon without apology. Here's a refined, warm, and audience-friendly closing that fits your channel's tone and older demographic. Before we go, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Share your city or country in the comments. It always makes me happy to see how far these stories travel. If today's story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. And most of all, thank you for spending your time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until we meet again, take care of yourself and keep a little kindness in your pocket.